Well, like I said already, it's a long one. So, for our faithful viewers and our wonderful audience that have been following us from the very onset, you can agree with me that our previous sessions have been one, usually dedicated to, sessions on how one can stay clear of debt, your rights as a debtor, how to clear your debt profile, things you need to know, how to invest, how to save, basically things that help you stay out of debt. However, the essence of this session is to bring to the limelight, like I said, most of our sessions have been usually in favor of debtors, quote and unquote. However, we deemed it fit to also bring to the limelight that in some cases of where debts, are so bad that it's not just, that the reasons are not one that are usually like, oh, the debtor has, the finances are not enough and all that. This session is dedicated to such instances where debtors intentionally refuse to clear debts, to pay their debt, and this leads to what is known as bad debt. Now, some time ago, I discussed what a debt is, and I mentioned that I broadened rather the scope of what debt entails. And I remember I mentioned that debt is not just limited to loan agreements. That a debt, D-E-B-T, refers to a monetary sum emanating from any transaction, which also can be calculated and identified from some form of arithmetical calculation, or being owed by one party known as the debtor to the other party known as a creditor. So I remember, I can't recall the case, but I remember I mentioned that case gave the exact description of what debt is. So for those of us that still looks at debt in terms of loan agreements alone, debt goes beyond that. So having cleared that out, whenever I hear the word bad debt, I'm not going to bore you with too much grammar, too much English. Bad debt simply means that money being owed is such that recovering it is next to zero, or that the chances of recovering that debt is very low. And ordinarily, there are various reasons for bad debts being existent. So the whole idea of bad debt is that it's not recoverable. It's one that has to be, and most times bad debts are written off. In other words, they are cancelled. In other words, they are taken as a loss on the part of the creditor. And what the creditor tries to do in this instance is try to organize its finances in such a way that, okay, if this loss takes place, how would it affect us as a company? So bad debt is one that nobody, be it a private individual or a company or a government establishment, bad debt is something that no creditor wants to incur. And that is why debtors let me be more specific. Debtors who intentionally refuse to pay have made it in such a way that they have tied the hands of creditors to such a manner that they have no other choice but to employ both ethical and unethical debt recovery means to get their money back. Because, think about it. Anybody being owed any amount, no matter how small, always desires that money is being paid back. So failure to do so, you are simply putting yourself at the mercy of the creditor, of the person owing the money, or the person that the money is being owed to. So, like I said earlier, the essence of this session is to bring to the limelight it's a situation where an intentional act of the debtor refusing to pay the money leads to what is known as bad debt. And like I said earlier, debtors, the idea usually of bad debt is that the debtors can't pay. But many creditors, and even aside from the creditors, many debt recovery agencies, mechanisms, forums, institutions can agree with me that upon liaising or exchanging correspondence with some debtors, we can see that sometimes, let me not exaggerate and say most times or all the time, but sometimes we are faced with a debtor who, number one, recognizes that truly he or she is paying, or it in the form, maybe if it's an organization, it's owing. Number two, and shows clear refusal to pay the money being owed, the debt. Now, what you also need to note is that in where bad debt is involved, no, I won't say no, but you will rarely see a creditor a debtor who will tell you straight away that he or she or it, in case of an organization, does not intend paying the money. However, there are indicators which should not be ignored, because this is a money transaction. All money, every detailed leading to any and every money transaction should not be ignored, no matter how subtle it may be. So, there are indicators for you to know that a debt would soon, if it is not already, would soon be regarded as a bad debt. And number one is known as delinquency. Now, this is usually when the debtor misses deadlines in terms of payment of debt. Obviously, most times, debts are usually paid in installments, and they're usually like maybe a memorandum of an understanding or the initial loan agreement or the initial contract itself stating at what point the debtor should pay a certain sum of money to the creditor. Now, in an instance where you notice, in a transaction that, the agreement is that money will be paid within the space of 6 months at, call it 500,000 naira per month, and it's agreed that the money should be paid on the 25th of every month. Now, you would see instances where the debtor, the 25th will come and pass, and no money has been paid, only for payments to be made sometime the next month, maybe early next month. And then it continues like that. In some instances, if not all, a month may go by and the money would not, and there will be no installment. And what makes this very unfortunate is that most times debtors don't let you know or bring to your notice that a payment is going to span beyond the agreed time. So it's only when the creditor reaches out that the debtor starts telling stories that basically touch their hearts, because nobody cares about all that story. Sorry to say, but that's the truth. So number one is delinquency. Number two is the poor debt payment history of anybody. Now, one mistake that we all make as creditors, let me not say we, because I'm not a creditor, but yeah, one mistake we all make as creditors is that we do not perform the necessary background checks that we need to make before lending out money or before engaging in business with any organization. Some creditors end it at simply asking for guarantors or your bank statements, or something that can easily be manipulated, without going on your own independently to make proper findings on anybody you would like to engage yourself in any form of money transaction. Now, it would be easier to do that if you are involved with a body, because all you just have to do is to write to the necessary bodies concerning this particular institution, and you would get the information you need. But the idea is, the creditors do not all, but some who find themselves in this situation, do not make the necessary background check needed to know the extent, the capability or the commitment of the person that we engage with in terms of debt settlement. And this usually poses a very serious issue, because if you don't have that, now like I said, what the point here is not that the person should not be in debt at all, but the point here is in the time the person, he or she or it, uses to settle the debt accruing to his or hers or its name. Now the next indicator is communication breakdown. Now, kudos to every debtor who keeps proper updates with their creditors. One of the biggest issues in the creditor-debtor relationship is lack of information, lack of communication rather, where the creditor basically drags or pursues the debtor as if, just basically pursues them without getting the appropriate updates that they need. Because the truth is that these creditors understand that, yes, they understand how the economy is and can be sometimes. So when as a debtor you meet them, you amicably meet them, that's the word, and explain your situation and proof of those situations, because it is law that he who asserts must prove. So you cannot come and claim financial hardship. You cannot come and claim, that your business has failed without showing, giving proof as to what even led to the failure of that business or things like that. So the moment you start noticing a communication breakdown between a creditor and the debtor, be rest assured that that debt being owed, or that debt that connects the creditor to the debtor, if care is not taken, would lead to what is known as a bad debt. In other words, the tendency to recover that debt is almost becoming zero. Now, another indicator of a possible bad debt to arise is the debt to income ratio of the debtor. Let me explain. Now, one of the ways of settling debts, or for those, yes, if one of the activities that both the creditor and the debtor usually engage in terms of debt settlements relates to gathering the available resources, that's the income of the debtor, to see or to outline it in such a manner that it will be enough to clear the debt being owed. Now, the moment you see a large margin between the income of the debtor and the debt owed by that debtor, the moment that the ratio is a large one, the tendency of that debt becoming a bad one, it's clear. For instance, what are the chances, except by miracle, except God wills it, but what are the chances of a debtor with an income total of 200,000? What are the chances of a debtor with an income total, monthly income total of 200,000? How would that be able to settle a debt of 20 million naira? How? If the person, now imagine that the debtor is to give you the whole 200,000 naira he or she or it makes every month, mind you, which is not possible, because like I said, it is the total income sum. So there is no way that the debtor would give you 200,000 naira every month, being the total income he or she or it has. But assuming that's the case, 200,000 in 10 places, it's how much? 2 million naira. In other words, even if that 200,000 naira is paid completely 10 times, it's still just 10% of the total sum owed. So the moment, now mind you, I am not saying that this may not be the case, because some debtors who are creative, who really desire to clear their debts, would employ different sources to gather more resources to settle their debts, and this could be in form of more credit facilities, but something known as soft loans. Soft loans are basically loans with little okay, yes, very little interest. For example, soft loans of 1% monthly, or grants you don't pay back grants, free grants, or borrowing money, or rather asking to be given money that you can't pay back. In other words, gifts of money. Now there are some debtors, I must commend some debtors who take their time to outsource money to clear their debts. But in a situation where someone, what are the tendencies of being owed to your total monthly income is 200,000 naira? What are the chances of settling a debt of 20 million naira outside interest? The 20 million naira is just the sum. We are yet to talk about interest on it. So the moment you see these indicators, the chances of a bad debt arising is very glaring. Now, like I said earlier, let me be sentimental in this presentation. To be honest, I don't think it is fair for a debtor to intentionally refuse to pay his debts, because the truth is, in as much as yes, the debtor owes the certain sum to the creditor, the moment the creditor employs a procedure outside that is not recognized by the law, the debtor has the right of action against the creditor. So you can imagine being owed money and your debtor is bringing an action against you, that the manner in which you try to recover your money was not properly done. I mean, it's ridiculous, right? But yes, the law recognizes that. For example, when you're being owed as a creditor, you take steps like going to seize property. You are depriving him of his right of property. You are converting his property. You are trespassing. These are actions you cannot. The law, as they say, is not sentimental. So the moment you try to employ these unethical means not recognized by law to settle that debt, you are going beyond your power as a creditor. And if the debtor institutes an action against you on that basis, if within the proper courts, the course of action would be proper. So, like I said, that's why I said it's not fair, because the essence of this session, like I said, intentional non-payment. And this could arise in two situations. One, it could be that the debtor actually has this money, but for some reason refuses to pay, usually because he or she is contending the debt. And this is where, when you go to court, it becomes a contentious matter, which you sue through writ of summons and all that. So this usually arises in a situation where two parties involve themselves in a contract, and one party is saying that the other party is owing this particular sum and the other party is disputing it. So in that situation, you sue whoever, the aggrieved party brings an action for breach of contract against the other party, asking for so sum, and then the other party replies on whatever reasons or circumstances from under which he or she is disputing that sum. So in that instance, that's understandable. But in a situation where there is no justification for the non-payment of these debts, what do you expect the creditors to do? So the truth remains that if debtors continue intentionally refusing, if they intentionally refuse to pay these debts, it will always lead to what is known as the bad debt. And a bad debt on its own, it's not good for the economy, because the bad debt simply means loss. The moment you hear bad debt, what should come to your mind is a loss. You as a debtor, you are losing, because that money is gone basically. That's why it's being unable to be paid, or it's being channeled to something else. Then on the other part of the creditor, the creditor is losing in terms of money that would have been used to beef itself up, or improve itself in whatever manner. So things like this should not continue. And a good solution to intentional non-payment of debt would be the proper background check of any and every individual who you intend to engage in any transaction with, be it a loan agreement, be it a contract agreement. Name is not enough background check. What matters are your records, because we have seen institutions, we have seen people go into debt. In the part of bodies or institutions or companies, they go into what we call what's known as insolvency. On the part of private individuals, they go into what is known as bankruptcy. We've seen people that we do not expect to find themselves in this situation, being in this situation. So, and people who probably engage themselves in businesses with these people because of their name alone end up regretting it. So it is not enough that a name is big. Every name, no matter how big or small, requires the proper background check in terms of how they organize their finances. This way, you get to know exactly who you are settling yourself with. And as a bonus advice for all creditors out there, be careful in terms of the amount of money you engage another person with. Because, like I said, a bad debt is a loss. Nobody wants to incur a loss. Where losses, bad debts are incurred severally, at the end of the day, it could lead to winding up that company or a business or the person. So, like I said, this session is dedicated to bringing this aspect of debt to the limelight, that it is not in all instances that debt arises out of financial hardship or business failure or things like that. Sometimes debt simply arises simply because the debtor refuses to pay debts being owed. And another precursor that I didn't mention, another indicator of a bad debt, relates to the timeline the debt has been owed. I mentioned earlier that for any debt that arises, you have 6 years to bring an action to recover that debt. Now, any debt that is being owed for over 3 years, now this is me talking from experience, any debt being owed over 3 years should be regarded as a bad one, because there are two things here. If the debtor had the resources to pay these debts, he or she would have done that. And secondly, the resources might be there, but the debtor refuses to bring in an action. Now, another advice would be this. Now, I'm not saying that whenever you see these indicators, you should back out. Always you are free to employ any and every possible mechanisms you need to get back your money. Remember, lawful ways. Number one being litigation in court. Number two being ADR. However, always ensure that the money you are deploying to recover these debts should not be beyond the debts, because you cannot expend, let's say, 2 million naira to recover debts of 750,000 naira. That's just bad business. And in some cases, the courts may grant you that specific damage. That's that money you incurred, that specific amount that can be picked out through mathematical equation. However, money in terms of cost of action, in terms of general damages, the courts barely awards those. And even if they do, the money that may be awarded may not necessarily be enough to cover the money expended. So by the time you see yourself, or you foresee spending more than the debts needed to be recovered, you may just end up having to write off that debt as a bad one, gather your financial records, tap it here and there, and basically learn from your mistakes so as not to find yourself in that situation anymore. I hope this has been a wonderful session. Thank you once again. I remain Benson Okezie-Wosu, Esquire. Have a lovely weekend.